The role of sport and physical activity is pretty vital, really, to men's health. There's a growing obesity problem. We've just seen from the Sport England statistics over the last few years that actually only about a third of men are participating even in a basic 3 times sort of 30 a week. So it's really important that we get out the message that physical activity doesn't mean having to go to the gym, but just finding some ways of building physical activity into your lifestyle is going to be pretty important. And obviously today as well, we're trying to link it in with some of the socio-economic demographics, in that quite often stadia like this are in some of the poorest wards in the country. And actually we heard today that the life expectancy of somebody living in this ward just around here is about 3 or 4 years lower than even the other parts of Manchester, never mind the highest parts of the UK. So actually there's a health inequality issue as well to deal with, and physical activity is going to play a really important part in that. For example, in education, disillusioned young kids, those who've probably been disaffected by school, there have been education projects that have been run over the last few years, and what's been demonstrated is those who don't feel part of the system somehow have an affinity with their local sports club. We know, particularly for young boys and men, that football in particular is pretty strong in terms of the bonds that people feel. And in rugby, where we've also been doing some work, the idea of a rugby player going in and telling a classroom or even a whole assembly full of children that to eat 5 bits of fruit a day makes you look like them and you can be physically pretty impressive, goes down much better than perhaps a health worker or even particularly a politician going in and telling them eating 5 bits of fruit a day is good for them. So these programmes are quite important, really, connecting with their heroes. And it's all about role models. Now we also need to make sure that children see people like themselves doing these things, but actually having a sports role model and the stadia. And you don't grow out of that. As you know, we in particular as politicians, we still love playing in big stadia like this. I'd love the opportunity to run out on the pitch here, and there is a magic about these places. We're actually at a really crucial point in the way that policies are changing. By the end of November, we will have the health department's equivalent part of the sports and health activity sort of agenda. They've been a little bit out of sync this year, as Sport England in particular has changed the way that it deals with sport, and it's got to focus much more on the Sport England bit, and the physical activity will be delivered not solely by the health agenda, but by lots of other partners coming together. Now that's due out very soon, and so actually the timing of this is pretty impressive, actually, because we're at a point where we could probably still influence the last parts of that policy coming together. I've seen the drafts, and there are still some gaps that need filling, so hopefully the symposium and the stuff we can take away from today will be useful for that. Sport, for its own sake, is good. I mean, that's one of the reasons that Sport England will be, working much more with the national governing bodies on delivering quality sport. It's sustaining those people already in it. But elsewhere, we've got to just think of new, innovative ways and match people's lifestyles to the way they do things at the moment. When life has changed over the last 40 to 50 years, and so we can't do everything in the same old way we've done it. So the message really is let's think innovatively, let's work more collaboratively together, and let's try and build in physical activity and sport into people's lives rather than expecting them to come to us. So that's hopefully what we'll learn from today. And stadia like this, sitting empty, not totally empty because obviously it's full of people like us today, but there are opportunities to use fantastic facilities like this up and down the country, and also to integrate other services. And so what we need to see is that imaginative use of facilities, of people's time and expertise, and I'm sure that by bringing all that together we can start to deliver to some of the poorest communities in the country. Well, as you know, they largely won the bid on the back of the idea that there would be a sporting legacy from the Olympics. It's one of the reasons I supported it, is there had to be a hard and a soft legacy. So you've got the buildings, and we see here, actually, this is a great example of a hard legacy. Commonwealth Games in Manchester, and now the stadium's still being used. So that's, compared to other Olympics around the world where you go and see the grass growing through the stadia seats at places like Barcelona or even Athens, where it's all just locked up. So the hard legacy is pretty important, but the soft legacy will be trying to inspire a whole generation of people to take up activity. We saw after Beijing the sale of bikes and cycles doubled straight afterwards, and swimming trunks, you couldn't get a pair of swimming trunks in Tesco to save your life because everybody was rushing to their swimming pools. So what we need to do is to capture that inspiration that the Olympics brings, and you can't just do that in the last 2 weeks, and so what we need to be doing is working now to capture the imagination of post-Beijing and the build-up to the excitement of London 2012 by using the Inspired by mark, by making sure that we use many of the Olympians that people now look up to as their role models. That will inspire people to do things, and then it's our job to make sure we sustain that, and that's the harder bit, actually. It's quite easy to get people on the bike for the first time, but on a cold wintry evening when you've got to go out training again, it's probably not quite so easy. So it's then down to the clubs and all those millions of volunteers up and down the country who actually run sport in this country to make sure that continues. Loughborough is probably the sporting capital, definitely of the UK, but if not, the whole world. Even the Australian Institute people are coming over to Loughborough now to see how that we do things. And there are other places like this in Manchester, where the Velodrome is, where we uniquely brought these things together. So Loughborough is pretty central, but it's not just at the elite level. I think the key bit about places like Loughborough is the sports science that then translates into sort of health policy as well. And it's also obviously the number of PE teachers and staff that we produce. So it's vital for that. I wouldn't say we're totally joined up yet. I mean, I chair the local county sports partnership, and we've been working really hard over the last 18 months in particular to make sure that we're working with the Primary Care Trust. They're the people that with a health agenda and with a public health agenda to deliver. And it's getting better, but there's still some way to go. And it's not entirely their fault, because of course before Sport England was actually responsible for delivering these extra 2 million people being active, but now there is that separation. So we need to separate and then bring them back together. So it's a difficult time, but I'm pretty confident, because I'm a sort of a can-do type person, and we can get rid of all these little boundaries and these silos that people work in. Through the county sports partnerships, we can deliver a coordinated approach, and that will mean then that you've got from school right through to veterans, all looked after in one single sports system, with everybody sitting around the table together trying to deliver sport and physical activity. The great strength with sport is it's the fact that it is almost every community has a sports club of some kind, and bottom line is actually you can have all this professional stuff, you can have fantastic stadia like this, but for most people their experience of sport and physical activity is at the grassroots, where it's volunteers who just a phenomenal job, and we can't cost the amount of volunteering time. It runs into billions of pounds worth of contribution. If you had to pay everybody to run our sports clubs, it'd be billions of pounds that we're using there. So that is fantastic, and that's where most people's experience is. That's what we need to nurture and to continue to grow, and that's what some of the job of Sport England is now to do, is not to do it from the centre, but it's just to make sure that people locally can effectively run their clubs, they can manage their clubs, they can grow their clubs, they can give people a good experience. And actually the most important thing on all of this is going to professionalise it all. We can do all this background and all that, but actually whatever happens is the person who turns up at their local club or their local activity has got to have fun. And I think we've got to just remember that at the end of the day, sometimes we can professionalise it too much, but it's got to be about fun.